Good morning, everybody, and welcome. After vacations, you are all tanned, and so now we are going to be a little bit serious. We are going to speak in English today for the sake of the professor. So if you need translation, we have translation outside.
Okay, good morning, everyone. We are starting our new season, let's put it this way. People have been in summer for a long time, and it's time for them to come back and start functioning and let their brain start working and being concerned about the problems in the world. That's the whole objective of this place. Okay. And today we are talking about a very important topic. ECS has a lot of interest in Africa, and we're going to talk about famine in Africa, which is actually very critical. But let me start by introducing our panel. I'm going to introduce my official guest last because I want to say a lot of things about you. Let me start with your commentators first. We have Dr. Samuel Kamara. From the African Development Bank. He's the principal country program manager in African Development Bank Egypt. He's from Sierra Leone. He has a bachelor degree in computer science from University of Maryland, and he has a master's in economics from University of Ghana. He worked in the World Bank for 9 years, and he's been in the African development team since 2009 and has been in Egypt for 9 months now, so he's practically Egyptian at this point. Okay. And so very happy that he's joining us. Was also supposed to come Mrs. Malene Blomberg, the country manager from the African Development Bank. So we have say hi to okay. Our friend and colleague and professor and a lot of things, Dr. Ibrahim Awad. Dr. Ibrahim Awad is a political scientist and political economist. At present, he's the professor of practice of global affairs and the director of the Center for Migration and Refugee Studies in the School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the American University in Cairo. He holds a BA in political science from Cairo University and a PhD from the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies, University of Geneva, Switzerland. He has worked for the League of Arab States, the United Nations, the ILO, holding positions such as Secretary of the Commission at the UN ESQUA, Director of the ILO Sub-Regional Office for North Africa, and Director of the ILO International Migration Program. Okay, and then last but not least at all, is our professor Dembitzer. Okay. And of acting as a consultant in 35 countries in sub-Saharan Africa with 5 different agencies of the United Nations, UNCDF, UNDP, UNIDO, ITC, ILO, the World Bank, the British government's Department for International Development, and 5 different international voluntary agencies, including Oxfam, CARE International, War on Want, the Fund for Research and Investment for the Development of Africa. He has worked in Pakistan for the Aga Khan and Indonesia for the Dutch aid program to that country. He published 4 books, actually: The Attack on World Poverty, Sleepwalking into Global Famine. Notice how his titles are challenging. Titles are always challenging. The Famine Next Door, Africa is Burning and the North is Watching. And this is the book that we are going to be talking about today. He was member of the team awarded the Nobel Peace Prize as a director of the European Office of IPPNW, and this was back in 1985. He's a fellow of University College London and holds the post of honorary professor at the University of Unisol in Brazil. He holds BE and MA from the University of Cambridge and Doctor of Philosophy from Uppsala University in Sweden. He obtained the PhD at the University of Lausanne and degree awarded jointly with the International Management Institute. Okay. Let me say, even before you listen to him, that he's a lovely guy. Okay. How can I say that? From all the email exchanges. I mean, it reveals a lot about the person and about how nice he is as a person. And this is really what matters most. The second thing, I've actually heard him talk yesterday. I was invited to another speech that he gave. All the audience were doctors. I was the only economist. So I guess I'm the one that was. Thank you, sir. And he was talking about globalization. And what he said was extremely interesting because he was saying, be careful what you wish for. We have globalization taking place. It could be creating jobs and doing all sorts of nice things, but it's doing a lot of horrible things. And unless we understand these, we are going to be in deep trouble, which we are. Okay, and we're admitting mankind is in trouble, okay, in the world, mainly because of globalization and inability to cope with its negative effects. So, and I actually, when I was listening to him, I was writing, just few quick words of what he mentioned. If I can find the paper, I can't. Yes, here I am. Because he wrote certain things that got my interest. He said, we are losing our humanity slowly with globalization. We are growing a lot of religious extremism, we are promoting conflicts actually. International capital is escaping taxation. We need a lot more on education and on prevention of problems. And he said something that touched my heart very quickly. He said, the world may be run by big people, but it is lived in by small people like us. And this is very true, okay? And he said, you started off ignorant, and I'm sure you're going to remain ignorant after the lecture, but ignorant at a higher level, okay? Because you know more. So this was actually a pleasure. The book will be talking about the famine next door. Africa is burning, the north is watching. I'm not going to talk about ideas there because I don't want to spoil everybody's surprise of a lovely book, but what I know and I'm sure of is that we are going to understand a lot and live in the issues in Africa and how to deal with them and the issues that we need to have knowledge of if we are to face this problem. Ibrahim Tafi. Let me start before you start. Let me just say something about the center. It's written in Arabic, but for those who are here for the first time, the center has a strategic direction that I have repeated a zillion times, and I will continue to repeat as long as I'm here. Okay, and that is we need to combine economic efficiency with social justice. We do not want to have no economic efficiency and no justice because we'll be dealing with this orange square here, a weak economy. Okay, and only very few people benefit from it. We do not want to have just social justice and no economic efficiency because we will be spreading poverty, and we do not want that. We do not want to have justice in poverty. Okay, we do not want to have economic efficiency and no justice because we're going to have a big economy but only few benefit. What we are seeking is the green square, and the green square is saying a strong economy that benefits everybody. This is our focus, this is our core, this is our spirit in the center. And anything and everything that takes us in this direction is something that we support and that we work on, and today's lecture is definitely one. Now I'm going to leave the floor for, this is the first slide? Your first slide? Is this your first slide?
This is, yes.
Okay, the floor. He has to stand up because he told me you have very nice armchairs and we want to keep them in a good condition. I might burn it with all my actions, so out of concern for the furniture in the center, I'm going to allow him. Stand up.
Do you need this for translation? Or for translation? Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Abla, for that introduction. Right. Actually, I said to Abla, that if I sat down, since I tend to be a bit agitated, the armchair might sort of catch fire, and I don't want to do that to this beautiful furniture. Now, friends, I am not a saint by any means, and if you ask my family, they will certainly deny even, the most modest positive attributes. But I'll tell you one thing. I was very, very privileged to work in Ethiopia for a year. I'm an economist, and I was therefore brought in by the UNDP to try to develop small-scale enterprises at the lowest level of economic development in Ethiopia. I had 42 projects for which I was responsible.
They need you to lift up the mic a bit so that they can translate.
There were 42 projects for which I was responsible, and the idea was to organize them in some way that they could become more efficient. Now, as Abla in the introduction said, I don't have much education, but lots of degrees, and most of my education has been by small degrees. And the work was to try to find markets, organize them better, make sure that they were solvent, and the like. And when you have had the privilege to work with some of the humblest and poorest people on earth, you know, that is a sobering thought. And this is why I've remained in that field, and I've been privileged, as our chair told you, to work in 35 countries. What has happened in the last 10, 20 years is a phenomenon, one of the aspects of globalization that we don't quite understand. And it is this: migration on a colossal scale from Latin America to the north. As you know, Mr. Trump, you know, and all those wonderful things that he's saying about Mexican rapists and the like, but it is part of that enormous effect. Am I making too much noise?
No, you are fine.
Okay.
You are fine.
From Southeast Asia, there are, 1.2 million people working in Qatar to prepare for the for the Football World Cup in 3 years' time. And from Africa, we have no idea of the numbers of people who are moving. My presentation has been designed very much for Western audiences, European audiences. You, if you agree, and we are going to have a nice argument afterwards, I hope will help me to make the case that the migration is not because Africans see Europe as the promised land, as a paradise. No, they can't. Most people in sub-Saharan Africa can no longer live in this continent, which is burning. There is not enough food, there is not enough water, and one of the most important natural resources in the world, arable land, which we all forget because none of us are farmers, is disappearing in the process. So this is why people are escaping. They're drowning, they're finishing in slave markets in Libya. We are condemning them. The whole world is condemning by not addressing the right issues. Right. I've just summarized there. From China to Africa, the last point, I'm not going to repeat the others. More than 1 million Chinese have settled in the African continent. It has become the second continent for China because there is no room, there is no food either. And there are no romantic illusions. These are people who can't live in China, and they quietly are invading your continent. All of this is on the website. I'm not going to see whether you can read or not. I assume most of you can. Okay. There is a chain reaction. First, population is increasing rapidly. Why? Okay. You know some of the reasons. I will tell you the reasons that I understand. because most of the issues relating to sexual reproduction, sexual health, and education about family planning is impeded by some forces within other parts of the world. The American majority right, the supporter of Mr. Trump, they will not allow sex education in aid programs provided by the USAID or by the US government. They're not encouraged either by right-wing, by the extreme Wahhabism Islam that is propagated by Saudi Arabia, and it is not in the interest of men, above all, to encourage family planning, because that means giving rights to women, one of the great challenges. When population is increasing, and in Kenya it is increasing at a rate of about 2.3, 2.4 per annum, that means that within 25 years, the population of Kenya is growing. What is the likely consequence? 1 million more babies are born in Kenya every year. Now, I'm not very good at maths. I'm only an economist, so I deal in theories, not in people or numbers. But 1 million new babies in Kenya every year means that if you have your average class of 100 kids in a primary school, you need to build 300 classes per day. Per day. Is the Kenyan government building that? Of course it's not. But the data provided by the World Bank show that school enrollment is increasing. No one is checking what is coming out, whether there are any people who can read or write, who can contribute to the improvements of their society. Because the data that we try to gather are insufficient. They're not complete. And most of statistics, believe it or not, is baloney. Statistician will tell us, train more statisticians. Yes, yes. The president of Tanzania said, if anybody dares put data that do not support the same data provided by the government, they will finish in jail. Now tell me how many courageous Tanzanian statistician will dare to put a little head above the parapet and lose it in the process. Of course not. And what will the World Bank or the African Development do? They will repeat the data provided by the government. Thank you very much. Okay. Back to the grassroots. Land must be split. I've already mentioned that arable land is decreasing. Farmers escape to the cities. The cities become horrible. You know it. I know it. All of us who travel to some of the big cities in Africa know that the slums, they become enormous. They explode. Because people don't go to parts of a city that they don't know. They will go to neighborhoods they know. They will know where people speak their languages, where they go to their extended families. You know this. What is the result? It means that tensions in the cities between the different ethnic groups mirror the tensions within cities themselves, within societies themselves, and they are out of control. People escape to other countries. Now, it's quite interesting, you see, because if you're clever and well-educated, and you've got the connections, we call it brain drain. You come and work to us. We have in the UK 100 doctors trained by Ghana, trained in Ghana at the expense of Ghanaian people, the Ghanaian taxpayer. 100 of them work in the National Health Service. It costs £250,000 to train one doctor. That's 40 million doctors that Ghana very kindly gives to the UK. We have 1,000 nurses trained in Ghana. It takes £10,000 to train one nurse. That is another 10 million. Thank you very much, Ghana, for subsidizing the British Health Service by giving us £50 million worth of savings on our medical staff every year. Now, I wish I could have the same data for Egypt. I don't know how many doctors, but yesterday at the conference that you, Abla, were referring to, I met 4 ladies who all have done their medical studies in the UK, contributed for years and years to the National Health Service, to the well-being of the people of the UK. Fortunately, they've come back. How many of them have never come back to Egypt to give to the society that has nurtured and encouraged them? Huh? You tell me, please, that you know better and can correct that. Why we have no interest in remedying that particular challenge? Not in the West. It is reputed that there are more Nigerian doctors in the US than in Nigeria. More Ethiopian doctors in the US than in Ethiopia. Hang on a second. Who is helping who? Huh? You tell me. So, brain drain for the privileged and poverty to other countries. And this is one of the fundamental things that we in Europe forget. Now, I'm very bad at producing these modern IT things, but the brown bit on the west of Africa is the US. The red bit in the center is China, and the light brown to the right is India. And the top, basically, as you know, Arab Africa, that is Western Europe and Eastern Europe. Look, the whole world, except for Latin America, can fit into the African continent. And you know what? We carry on generalizing about economic issues, economic problems, social problems, and so on. Africa has got to be treated not as one unit, but in its complexity. And most Europeans, most Americans, I suspect, have absolutely no understanding. And because there is no understanding, there cannot be any work towards solutions. Now, the African Development Bank, Dr. Adesina, made the point recently in its annual report, I think it was in 2017, that sub-Saharan Africa did not import any food in 1980. In 2016, it was probably importing between 35 and 40 billion in that year alone, on imports. And it is, he estimated, again in the African Development Bank's annual report, that it will be 110 billion by 2050. But why? Africa, again, by all definitions, FAO, various agencies of the UN, the 32 agencies of the UN that deal with food issues in one part or another, are reminding us over and over again that Africa is the only part of the world that has potentially the land to feed the whole world. The Africa savanna, not first-class land, but could be developed to become productive, to become arable. It needs the treatment that, for example, Brazil adopted in the Cerrado, which has now become one of the greatest exporters of food for the whole world. It wasn't done very nicely. Lots of people suffered. Yes, I know that, and it is unjust, and you deal with social justice more than socialism. Social justice needs to be applied, but it can be done if our governments were more concerned, if our international institutions were more competent. The number of undernourished people in sub-Saharan Africa is likely to go up because poverty is going to go up, as you quite rightly reminded us as we were preparing to come here. Notwithstanding all the data that telling us Africa is growing, Ethiopia 7% per annum, Kenya 5% per annum. Rubbish! What the GDP figures measure are what can be measured: the number of new buildings, the number of shopping malls, the number of kilometers of new roads that have been established. They don't measure the progress of ordinary people. And here, let us again try to inject a dose of realism. Sorry, I'm probably pressing the wrong thing, but it would be, I would like to move on. Thank you. And here is what I'm saying. The World Bank puts world poverty at $1.9 per day. Well, I'm sorry, that is much too high. And as for most of African countries, it will be, just not achievable. Now, there has always been inequality in Africa. But what the modern world is doing is making life much worse. And we certainly do not seem to be able, through research, through studies, to highlight the depth of poverty in rural Africa, where there is an absence of the most basic requirements for life. Now, again, you can read all of that if you're interested. And here is, to me, and I've worked with the World Bank, I've worked with some of the UN agencies, are some of the reasons. First of all, the World Bank, the ODI, DFID, and all major consultancy firms live in air-conditioned offices, like we are doing here, and we decide the policies for people who live in very different societies. It doesn't work. We need to adapt. We need to have our meetings in less sumptuous surroundings. We don't need to attend Davos. You remember in Davos in January this year when that young Swedish girl, Greta Thunberg, you remember her? She made quite a splash across the world. She went by train. But there were 1,500 private jets that landed at the airport in Zurich. Who is fighting climate change? There is a show about it, not the reality. You know it. We all know it. But we carry on with this charade. The fourth item, we are trying to use privatization to solve some of the key problems that are social injustice. It isn't going to be a neoliberal approach that is going to enable our world to improve. Again, let us talk about food. The US devotes $164 billion per year to agriculture, and the CAP, 55 billion euros. Their markets are highly protected, so that you, from Egypt, don't export food to Europe. So, what happens to that food? It is donated. You know it as economists. That's one of the few things that I do know about economics. That if you donate something that could be produced locally, you're killing local initiative, you're killing local economies. But we are so hypocritical. We continue through the World Food Programme to donate food to societies that could produce their own. That is a monstrous hypocrisy as far as I'm concerned. And here, since the majority, I think, in this room are economists, is my most fundamental challenge of all. There isn't one economic engine and set of economic rules that can apply to the whole world. We are very different economic systems. The rich club, the OECD, goes by certain rules, certain mechanism, classical economic relationships. The resource-rich countries in the Gulf, where their own citizens are highly privileged, given free housing, free education, free health, and so on, that is not the normal economic rules that we apply to the first group. Then there is China using state capitalism, tremendously powerful. China is on the quiet buying up Africa. Not only more than 1 million Chinese have settled across the continent, your continent, but they're buying Africa because they don't care about the indebtedness of the African nations. They will take their assets. Why not? China needs those assets. It doesn't have enough land and resources to feed itself. And China is doing it, but I suspect that Turkey, Indonesia, Brazil, powerful economies with a very strong central state will be able to follow that kind of state capitalism model. It's very attractive for the rulers. And in the long term, will benefit their populations, I suspect. But then poor economies that have to develop agriculture, their only resource, they have got yet different rules, my friends. Look, 90% of all activities in Africa are in the informal sector, are cash. No one is going to tell me that the rules of 90% in the cash economy are the same rules as those that the World Bank understand. It just doesn't work. It defeats logic. It defeats gravity, which is why I don't believe there is one economic system for all. Sorry, again, the little machine got stuck. Oh, it is working finally. Sorry. I pressed the wrong button. It's the story of my life. Right. So, thanks. Don't go too far away. I'm going to make a mistake again. So what do we need? We need to concentrate on agriculture. You remember, it's economic stupid. You remember Clinton saying that? He was re-elected on that motto. I've adapted it. It's my invention. Thank you very much, Mr. Clinton. It's agriculture that we need to concentrate on. It's not industry, not because Africa could not industrialize, it's because China has already been there. The Far East is already there. Bangladesh is now one of the great industrial countries in the world. Africa, things cost. In Addis Ababa, there is no river. So things have got to come by road or by railway now. No wonder food costs so much more. No wonder that all necessities of life cost so much more. So we need land reform. The poorest deserve the only thing that they have, the land that they work. It's a basic assumption of economics that if you have a free market, you need to have possession of your property. And the poor are not granted property rights. According to the World Bank, less than 5% of the total land of Africa is actually registered. And that only happens in the cities. Everywhere else, it means the traditional hierarchies, traditional authorities, the rulers of the villages have the right to dispose of the land of the poorest at their will because there are no rights. And it would not cost that much with modern satellite facilities to have decent land registration for the whole of the African continent. If you don't have clarity of land ownership, you cannot plan for water reservoirs, for rural roads, forests, commercial farming, etc., etc. And we need to build up from the base. Understand the role of farming. Understand the crucial role of women. Development depends on women. They are the key factor in changes of society. And we are here talking about not changes of economies, but changes in society. And the woman, the right of the woman to dictate the size of her family, to have education, to own her land, to become primary. At the moment, enormous number of donors, and they are all playing with one another. Why? Because of the egos involved. The ego of the director of the president of the World Bank, and the managing director of the IMF, and the president, and the director general of WHO, and the director general of the FAO, all saying, my solution is the right solution. Don't you dare question it. And the next thing is, the development agencies, CARE, for which I've worked, World Vision, for which I have not worked and I don't want to work, and others, my version of Christianity, my version of Islam is better than yours. You know, who is trying to kid who? Right. Thank you, sir, that I made you laugh. I'm very grateful for that. So, my friends, I will stop here. And if you have been listening, thank you very much.